Good morning, Pastor Ron Jetter, Immanuel Lutheran Church, Grandview, Washington. Today, Monday, the 18th of January, 2021, Martin Luther King Jr. holiday observed today. Well, I've gone through the book of Leviticus and want to go back and pick up a couple of things because as comprehensive as it is, there are places where it doesn't really state things as clearly as it might. And the two real sections that I've dealt with, the one chapter 18 dealing with human sexuality, and then all of the chapters dealing with this idea of kosher for food. It all falls under this one category of kashrut. That is to say, to live in a way that is as pure as one possibly can, to live in a way that is pleasing and is acceptable to the Lord. And the reward for that is that God continues to provide protection for the Israelites as they begin or prepare to begin the conquest of the land of Canaan. They are not yet in the land of Canaan, they are just now moving into it. And we do know that Moses will die without entering the land. But again, this was written after the fact, so they're looking back, and so sometimes they're already putting things into the written word that did not necessarily happen in the time of Moses, but had developed as a result of the Mosaic Code. So Moses is still given credit for being the one to bring all of these rules, which they then had to interpret. Of course, every rule, you get a situation that says, yeah, but how does the rule apply in this situation with regard to human sexuality? I've had feedback on that. And again, I have said that when we look at the words of Jesus regarding human sexuality, first of all, he doesn't say that men are always in charge. Whereas when we read Leviticus, it's clear that God is writing to men, that women are subservient. I remember the woman who was caught in adultery, and Jesus says, I'm not accusing you. Oh, and anybody else? Go ahead. You have no sin. Throw the first stone. And as the crowd looks around, they know each other's sins. No one's going to throw the first stone. But then he tells the woman, now, amend your life, because you can see what's going to happen to you the next time you're caught. So go and sin no more. Change your life. But he doesn't accuse her. He simply gives her the warning. She's a woman in a place where women are blamed, and men would pay a penalty, such as a goat or 2 turtle doves, and then they're forgiven. Not quite equality, is it? Okay, he loses a couple of small animals, and she loses her life. Yeah, Jesus said nothing about abortion. We heard from the Psalm yesterday about God knowing us from our mother's wombs. But there was no specific talk about it one way or the other. And some have said, well, we can't protect a child before the child's born unless we also agree to do justice to that child after the child is born. That a child should have a society to be raised in which the child can grow up free, regardless, male, female, and that things such as food security and having a roof over your head, having education, that it's great to protect children and make sure they're born, but if they're born into poverty, then how is that pro-life? That pro-life must be both before and after the child's birth. Not either or, and it's odd the way that politically it's been divided into either or. Protect the unborn, protect the born, but not both. And Jesus was really silent on that, but what we know he did do, he did say that there should be protections for those people who have diseases, things wrong with them. They should have healings and curings when possible, but society shouldn't be judging them. And oddly enough, today in Leviticus 19, we're going to see that some of those protections go way, way back. The prohibition against incest or homosexuality, as I said, the relationships that don't produce children are considered against kashrut. They are not considered part of what is acceptable to God. Relationships that produce children allow their population to grow. The large population is more capable of defending itself and of conquering the land. They needed to overwhelm their enemies over and over and over for 12 tribes to take up 12 regions in the land of Canaan. So they simply cannot spend their energy in relationships that don't have as their singular purpose producing babies and raising babies into hopefully strong young men who can fight and who can hunt, and strong young women who can support the men in their work by creating stable homes where there's good food and so on, balanced diet, clothes, all the things that mothers provide. Again, Jesus didn't talk about homosexuality. He didn't talk about incest. And for us to lift any single verse out of a single chapter in the Old Testament and to say that it stands higher than John 3:16 and John 3:17 is to say that we're going to use law to supersede gospel. The entire New Testament, the Christian Testament, is about law, subservient to gospel. Gospel trumps law. God's overwhelming love for all people trumps law. Now, Jesus did say regarding sexual sin, if you lust, you've already committed all the sins in Leviticus. You're as guilty as if you went out and did every one of those abominable things. You're already guilty because you've already thought about it in your heart or your mind. So assume you're guilty. Assume you're guiltier than anybody else you're pointing to. Now, where does that leave you? Condemned. Therefore, you have no hope unless God chooses to forgive you by God's decision, not your own. You are in a powerless position. You are in bondage to sin and cannot free yourself, as it says in the Gospels and in the epistles of John. Cannot free yourself, as Paul says over and over and over. Therefore, there's only one remedy for the hopeless: the cross. Same is true of kosher. We cannot live a kosher life. We cannot ever be pure enough to be acceptable. We are depraved. We are an abomination. The cross alone is our answer. So now I want to look again at these kosher laws, because one of the things someone mentioned to me is, what about meat and milk? Now, the kosher laws, they're described in Leviticus, don't get into that. We have to go into Deuteronomy, which then echoes something we already heard from Exodus. A kid shall not be boiled in its mother's milk. And that has been interpreted in their set of daily laws called the Talmud as, you cannot have meat and milk in the same dinner. Well, the idea is that here you've milked the goat, and now you've killed that goat's kid, and you're cooking the kid in the milk of that. And does that goat have feelings? Does the goat understand? It's a way of saying you will respect animals more than that. And that's been interpreted as different Jews saying, I have to have a separate dish if I'm going to have cottage cheese and pineapple on it, along with my flank steak. And some say, no, you cannot consume meat and dairy within 6 hours of one another. They need to be prepared in separate sinks with separate utensils, served in separate dishes. The smell of milk cannot in any way be tasted in the meat, or vice versa. Meat and milk don't belong together. So using milk for your turkey gravy would be prohibited. It's not kosher. And it had nothing to do with microbiology or the germs of one getting into the other. It was simply that they need to understand that kindness to animals is expected of them, not cruelty to animals. Now let's get into chapter 19. There's a couple of things I just wanted to hit here. Food. When you cook food, it shall be eaten on the day you cook it or the day after it. By the third day, it is profane. It is not kosher anymore. It's an abomination. Well, of course, that's when it has salmonella, right? Verse 9, chapter 19. When you reap the harvest of the land, you will not reap to the very edges or gather the gleanings. That's to allow gleaners to come in. Leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. If a grape falls from the vineyard, the poor and the alien in your land, the non-Israelite, can come, and God doesn't want them to starve. And this one I love too, 13. You shall not defraud your neighbor, you shall not steal, you shall not keep the wages of labor. 14. You shall not revile the deaf or put a stumbling block before the blind. You shall fear your God. I am the Lord. So even back then, even though they would say if you're deaf or you're blind, it is a deficiency that may make you unacceptable to God, but you're not unacceptable to each other. The blind, the deaf, those who are physically somehow differently abled or disabled are to be protected. And that certainly echoes what Jesus said about the way he treated people. The man born blind from birth, how Jesus gave him sight. But we see the way society treats people. And both the old law of Leviticus and the new interpretation of Jesus would say, you need to be careful about how you treat the little ones. What is a little one? The poor, the aliens, women when they don't have any power or voice, those who have a physical limitation, and when you get up in age, we all have some, and it increases. More and more limits on us. We lose our activities of daily living over the years. There is to be protection then for the elderly, for the widow, the blind, those who have hearing difficulties. So even a society that's supposed to produce lots of strong babies to become strong young men and women does not throw away its little ones, does not put stumbling blocks, does not make life hard for them. In fact, part of why they have to prosper is so that they have some left over with which they can take care of the little ones. Should we do any less?